people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us.
All down the thunder, well now you got it. Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me! Revolution Radio!
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good evening, folks. This is Diamond from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, bringing you another edition of The Inconvenient Truth, our radio program every Wednesday night. And thank you for listening in. Tonight, our guest, which is returning again for the second week, but not the final week, and not certainly the best week, Dr. Anita Bailey, Phd, author of Cold Times, Preparing for the Mini Ice Age. Now, tonight we're going to be discussing 3 chapters in her book, chapters 4, 5, and 6, which discuss food, the immediate basics, water, purifying, collecting, and storing, and then protecting your food. And it should be an interesting conversation, so please help me welcome Dr. Anita Bailey. Dr. Bailey, are you there on the line?
I am. Can you hear me good?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. Thank you for having me back on your show, Diamond. It's just a delight to be here.
Well, I'm very pleased that you're here. And how about some of the events that are unfolding in the last week? We have the third nor'easter barreling up the east coast of the United States. There are still tens of thousands of people without power. And I'm sure some of them are concerned because they hear that there may be a fourth nor'easter on the way in just a few days, the 17th. And my GFS models are showing a huge blizzard coming through on March 30th and April 1st. So what are your thoughts about what you're seeing in the news since last we talked?
Well, it's mind-boggling and it's horrifying, and I'm very glad that I don't live up there. That was one of the places years ago we looked at because way back in the 70s, land was fairly cheap up there. But goodness, if I was up there and as prepared as the average person, I would just be terrified.
Yeah, especially if you're in one of the areas that is perpetually hit. So as the Northeast gets hit over and over again, only very few people are experiencing it again and again, specifically the suburbs of Boston. And it looks like they're going to get hit at least 2 more times. Those people are going to be running out of food and water. And we've already seen this winter alone some shortages with people panic buying, let's say in the UK when the beast from the East came there. And I just watched a David Dubine video, Adapt 2030, where he was showing my stomping grounds, Philly, where I was born and raised. They actually had a shortage on milk in Philly from this last nor'easter, number 3, which really didn't even hit Philly. So I'm sure a lot of people are getting concerned about what's happening as far as availability of food with these storms.
Yes, I can imagine that. The typical person has less than 2 weeks, and the average of that less than 2 weeks is 3 days of food in the house. Now, there are some people who simply don't have any food in their house. In fact, I know of some folks around the Virginia area who had a home built and didn't put a kitchen in it.
Well, let's talk about, this is a great segue to get into our... You want to repeat yourself? I didn't hear you. You might have been cut off.
I think we were. I see the little poor network connection. Dang. I was just saying I knew someone who had a home who didn't put a kitchen in it.
Well, that doesn't make much sense if you want to cook food, does it?
No, it sure doesn't.
So this is a good segue into getting directly into the discussion about preparedness and specifically food and water. Now, the main survival rule, which is preparing to survive in the next 3 months, is that you can only live 3 minutes without air. You can only live 3 hours without shelter if it's below zero. You could only live 3 days without water, and you can only live for 3 weeks on your body fat. So it's important to source clean drinking water and food if you want to live for 3 weeks during an emergency. So that's a good way for our listeners to start to understand how important it is to just have a little bit of water and food set aside in case something catastrophic happens. You're aware of the 3 minute, 3 hour, 3 day, and 3 week rule, aren't you, Anita?
Yes.
Can you add to it?
When you concept, important to realize too that up until the last, maybe 30, 40 years, people routinely put back food. Routinely. And of course, throughout all of human history, people had to store food or they didn't live to reproduce. Think of the great dates in Rome when there's palace across a room that has what they call amphora, which is just basically a big clay pot with residues of olive oil, with wheat in it, with the things that the people would have eaten then stored up because they knew they had to eat and there wasn't a supermarket to go to if you wanted to. So the concept of storing things has been part of humankind's entire history up until just a generation or two ago. Do you find that to be true in your area?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I grew up as a child, I remember in my aunt's house, the whole basement looking like a bomb shelter. And my grandmother and other people's houses were similar. And I really don't see that today anymore. In fact, if you do have steel shelves in your basement filled with food, people think you're a weirdo, and they think you're like an anti-government prepper, which you probably are, and that's probably a good thing. And this is because history is chock full of weather-related famines. This is coming right from your book, Anita. One of the first things that happens is the migration of the starving off their land, which further pressures any place that food is still growing. During the Great Finnish famines of the 1600s and 1800s, poor hungry peasants took to the highways looking for anything to eat. And they were already making bread from tree bark. So the first thing that happens is people come looking for your food, because if you're hungry, you'll do anything. And that is really the fear I have moving into this potential scenario unfolding however it does, is that there are so many desperate people out there that are not prepared. They're going to come looking for food.
I absolutely agree with that. And there's a layer of complexity on the migratory pattern now that we might not have seen in the past, and that is that our governments are often disingenuous about whatever the situation is, or they're misinformed. You think back to Katrina, where at the point in time where people could have been evacuated by buses, the governing bodies said, stay in your house. Don't leave now. What their thinking is I have no idea. And you look back at it, and it's perfectly obvious what they should have done, but they didn't. So if there is serious food shortages suddenly, suppose, let's just give a little example up there in the Northeast, if all of a sudden meteorologists realized this weather was going to continue in that area for the next 2 months, would this be an announcement made to the populace? Or would the government say, all is well, just sit tight, we're going to get everything under control, we'll bring in special trucks? I don't know. But I know the government is quite disingenuous now. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that for our listening audience, they should be prepared to shelter in place, simply because it has become quite clear that if you're near a population center and there is a catastrophic event about to unfold, that the powers that be would rather have you shelter in place than to clog the arteries and to tie up the little infrastructure that they have in trying to save those roadways. So by keeping you in place, they have a better way to control you. It's a control element, like putting all the animals in the barn before the tornado comes.
That's a very apt comparison, because when the animals are out, they just run helter-skelter. So if you're thinking of people as barnyard creatures, and perhaps that's the way they look at us on those higher levels, if they just keep us in a nice, controlled area, then we're not a problem to them anymore. Of course, we, the little people, we're the worker bees, too. We're the ones that keep the hive going. And if the worker bees aren't treated well, they're going to migrate somewhere else and leave the queen all alone. So it's a challenging forward, but people aren't all that different than they have always been. And placating the masses is a feature that occurs routinely, bread and circuses. In government, they start thinking like the people in government always have. So we need to, and once again, I don't want to say that everyone in government is evil or good and you're bad. A government is no smarter than the people that are in it. And by and large...
Excuse me a second. Why don't let me drop you and then call you back and see if we can get a better connection?
That would be good. You're going to call me back or Anita?
No, the doctor.
Okay.
Just hang up and I'll call you right back.
Okay, I'll do it.
All right, for those of you listening, we're talking about food storage and the importance of at least providing 3 months of food for your family, because it's becoming clear to Anita and I that the powers that be are not going to really be in a position to help large groups of people. When we're talking in the millions, they're not going to be able to shelter and feed you. So it's important for you to start thinking about sheltering in place and being able to provide for your family. Are you back, Anita? I guess they're still working on that.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back. So I was just talking about the rules of food storage, and you have a great bulleted list here on Chapter 4 about the importance of food storage. Now, most people would think that this list would include, the proper container or what temperature you should keep it at, but that's really not the most important things about your food storage, is it, Anita?
No, those are important elements in the long run, but the most important critical thing is to have some food on hand. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be freeze-dried. If you've got 20 or 30 cans of corn and potatoes from the supermarket, you've got food you can live on. You might not be living good, and it might not taste so good after 4 or 5 days of the same thing, but it is food. I want to add, too, on canned goods, commercially canned goods. A lot of people have become fearful of the expiration date on these. It's actually what they call a best buy date. that date, it's going to be better for you afterward. The food does not become poison after the expiration date. As long as your cans have not swelled up or cracked or leaking, the food is probably fine. How does that sound?
Let's talk about long-term storage goods. Let's start there. These are things that are the cheapest to acquire, the easiest to store, and you can create a long-term storage safety net if you simply acquire something called oxygen absorbers. And this long-term food storage list includes wheat, white rice, corn, sugar, any type of dried bean, rolled oats, pasta, dried potato flakes, non-fat powdered milk, and other dehydrated vegetables. And these can store up to 30 years if you simply vacuum seal them and put oxygen absorbers inside and put them inside of a container. It's a great place to start stockpiling food security for very few dollars. Do you have a particular oxygen absorber that you prefer?
No, not any particular brand. I found some that seem to have a little less potency, but I'm less concerned about oxygen absorbers because of the way that I've grown accustomed to storing food than I am with having the quantity. Some of the biggest problems you face in food storage are the infestation of insects into it and rodents getting at things that are in softer containers. So when you're storing those two elements pretty securely, or be horribly disappointed when you open up your bag of flour and find something's been living in it for a year. Now, one way to protect your flour...
You're really breaking up really bad, Anita.
And any other...
I can't hear you on my end.
Okay.
I wonder if you could call back the station on a landline. Or he could call you on your phone number.
Well, I'll tell you, my cell phone has pretty poor reception anyway.
And you don't have a landline?
Not that's usable. Not from here.
Okay, well, let's just go with the Skype connection because it's still about 80% audible.
Okay.
And maybe we can figure it out at the hour break.
Sounds good. All righty. So I was saying, take your flour and your beans and whatever you have that's loose and put it in a freezer for a minimum of 4 days. 2 weeks is better. And that will kill any insects living in it, any bug eggs. And everything coming from the supermarket has something living in it. So just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Once those things have been frozen, let them come back up to room temperature, and then you can bag them, airtight bags if you got them, Mylar bags if you've got them, and once again, you can get that online, any of the major sellers, preparedness places, and Mylar bags can be sealed with a special device that's a couple $100. It's just a heat sealer, or you can use your common household iron and an ironing board, or I use a 2x4 placed over the edge of the bucket. And you just iron that thing until it's sealed. So you can do food preservation fairly inexpensively if you're willing to put in the time. You trade off money for time. If you got more money, go ahead and get the stuff that's already preserved in number 10 case and put it on. Did you get most of that?
Yeah, everything until the last sentence, which is fine. So real quick, let's switch over. So that is a great way to seal, and the standard way, if you read prepping texts on how to seal large supplies of food, which you typically don't want to store in more than an amount you can actually move around. That's an important thing, because if it's long-term storage, you're going to get older and you're going to need to be moving these things around. So keeping each individual item to 30 to 50 pounds per unit is key, which rolls over to water. Water gets very heavy when you start storing it. Once you get over 5 gallons, you're talking 40 pounds or more, and the weight becomes really unmanageable. So you want to store water in 3 different size containers. The immovable size allows you to store massive quantities of water for long-term storage, and the intermediate sizes, the 5-gallon type, allows you to have large caches of water that you can move around if you need, up into the kitchen or wherever you're using it. What other tips could you tell us about water as far as purifying it for storage? I know your book tells the bleach method, so could you tell our listeners about that?
Yes. There's different authorities who will proclaim a certain amount of bleach to add per quart or per gallon or larger container. Bleach is volatile in the air. So I'm in favor typically of adding a little more than you routinely need and then leaving your container open to the air when you're ready to use it. Golly, let's see, I don't have it on the tip of my tongue. Number of drops per quart.
20 drops per gallon.
Thank you. I was heading toward 8 drops per quart.
Well, if you go to, Anita, if you go to prepping sources, they say 8 drops per gallon if it's clear, 16 drops per gallon if it's cloudy. But I agree with 20 drops per gallon if you're storing it, because you don't want accidental algae, and you can always aerate it for a day and it will be fine.
Absolutely right. Most of us are on tap water. Some of us have well water. Tap water's already got some bleach or other bactericide in it, and a lot of times water from your tap and put it in 3 bleach that we're talking about here is not the scented bleach. It is Clorox or off-brands, and all it is bleach. Nothing extra in there. So be careful on that, because those other things are not good for you. Bleach isn't good for you, but it's better than drinking a bunch of bacteria that'll make you sick and kill you. Alternatively, you can add iodine drops if you have any, nascent iodine or Lugal's iodine, and several drops of that, and it will kill germs. The best thing in the world is to boil your water. Kills everything that could possibly live in it or make you sick, except for chemicals. And neither bleach nor iodine will take care of that either. So you want to make sure your water comes from a good source.
I agree with that. And for those that are out there listening, the average human can survive quite well on 1 gallon of drinkable water per day. And that is if you're not working too hard or you're not in an extreme environment. That's just to keep pretty much optimal health at a minimum amount. So that would be 365 gallons of fresh drinkable water per person per year. So if you have a family of 3, you need 1,000 gallons of drinking water, which if you put into 5-gallon containers is a crazy amount of containers, which is why I recommend getting a subsurface cistern. For about $1 a gallon, you can have a very thick underground plastic container that holds that drinking water away from sunlight at a constant temperature. And if you add a little bit of bleach and maybe a silver dollar, that water could store for up to a decade perfectly fine or longer. When you need it, you can dig it up. It can be hidden from others. If it's a drought, they'll never know it's underground. So these are just some tips moving forward where you can store the main stockpile. And the rest of the containers should be in varying sizes in case you need to bug out or move around. considerations also are you should be near a source of water, because if the event continues past your supply time, when that runs out, then what are you going to do? All the rest of the people are also going to be looking for water. So if you put yourself near a water source while you're depleting your water supplies, if the situation is long-term, you can then be going out to a remote source and gathering water to bring back and filter and to restockpile. Is there anything else you could add to that strategy?
Well, I think you're correct in the main there. You definitely want to have a renewable source of water. Rain buckets is a good way to get it if you have adequate rain there. But I'd like to add that the 1 gallon per day number, I went back and tried to find the original source for that, and I could not find it. There is no research that says 1 gallon a day is adequate to preserve anyone. However, there was a study of disasters, and they found that 4 to 5 gallons per day per person is a more realistic health-sustaining number. And that's for hygiene. Keep in mind, during any kind of disaster, the most illness that is seen is diarrhea. Diarrhea is not only messy, it's water loss. You're losing water. So you have to drink more if you have diarrhea. And in any disaster setting, you're probably going to have diarrhea. So that's something to keep in mind. A gallon a day will get you through 3 days, a week, maybe 2 weeks. But if that's all you have, then you're trading hygiene for drinking water, or you're mistakenly pouring water down your toilet to flush it and using up your drinking water. So kind of keep that as a strategy in the back of your mind. Get your water up, gallon a day, as quickly as you can, and then start thinking, how can I get more? Because for the long run, you need more. And that's all right.
I agree with that. The gallon a day was the minimum amount for drinking. I was going to add on to that, you need to triple it with non-potable sources for washing, because washing and disease will quickly be an issue as the weeks progress into whatever catastrophe is mandating that you get into these supplies. So keeping good hygiene, and also you brought up a good point, do not be using the flush water in your toilet like you would in a normal scenario. It would be better to immediately dig a latrine outside and start doing your important deeds out there in a hole, and preserve all of your potable and non-potable water for washing your hands and drinking exclusively, because you might need the fertilizer later for growing food.
That's exactly right. If it's too cold to go outside, make sure you've got a 5-gallon bucket you can put a plastic bag into, and use that. Close the bag after every use so that it doesn't fumigate the house. And then when you can get outside, bury that bag in the hole and put another bag in your bucket.
Yeah, that's a standard compost toilet. We used one for a year up on the mountain, and we had access to sawdust. And you just cover it with sawdust. It had no odor. It was an outdoor outhouse, but it is remarkably odorless.
Yes. Very true. Very true. And easy to build, costs next to nothing. You just need to show.
So what really has to happen here to be to survive and thrive in these times is you have to think outside of the box. We just turned our defecation into a solution. You know, it's not if you think of everything as a problem, it's definitely going to unravel before your very eyes into a problem. If you start thinking completely differently, you have to erase all of your long-held beliefs and start thinking in a new, innovative, practical way on how to survive and thrive now that everything has changed. If you've set yourself up with a good amount of storage of water, a location towards getting more water, you can then start to change your lifestyle to adapt to the situation. Adapting is going to be very important because a lot of people aren't going to be able to psychologically adapt, and we're going to have to lead by example.
That's very true, and I'm glad to hear you had that kind of experience because it means you speak from experience. And for a lot of folks who are beginning to get into preparedness, it's hard to tell when you're listening to someone who has actually been there, done that, or someone who's kind of a keyboard commander who thinks this is a great idea and why doesn't everybody do this? Everyone goes through, who's starting to prepare, goes through a phase when it's hard to differentiate it. It's hard to tell who's right and who's wrong. So use your good sense. That's your only tool. And I think I said this last time, but it bears repeating. If whatever is being true, it is. If somebody's telling you an item that will save your life in any disaster, it won't. So just keeping those concepts in mind will save you a lot of hard knocks learning. What do you think of that, Diamond?
I think these are all very good points. Now, let's just give some more tips before we turn over to food and growing food on where we're at right here. It's important that if you're now no longer flushing your urine and feces down the toilet, that you're storing them if you do not have farm animals, because you may need these to fertilize your food. A friend of mine back in a suburb of Philadelphia rented out his house. But he mandated that everyone poop in a bucket instead of the regular toilet because he ran an urban farm, and it was a farm of example where all the food that came out of his farm was powered by the poop of his renters. And he checked the temperature in the human manure pile, and he did it all very logistically because human manure is a little bit more, is hotter than most. So you have to be very diligent in getting it to the right spot to actually use it to fertilize food. And in fact, all the people that lived in his apartment had to be strict vegans and not eat preservatives because he wanted the cleanest, best product for fertilizing his vegetables. Are you familiar with the human manure method, and what do you think about it?
I think it's fabulous. It's worked throughout history. There are, I believe, parts of China where that's their primary fertilizer. We have such a resistance and fear of using human manure, much less animal manure, that in a lot of ways, our culture has become just fearful of food and the byproducts of food, which is manure, in general. And to my mind, that's because people are so far away from the original sources of food, they don't realize what all is involved. I have to tell you a story. There were some kids, this was a few years ago, who came over to the little farm we have and noticed that we had chickens. And I took them inside the chicken house and let them collect eggs. And I asked them, where do you think these eggs come from? And to the child, they said they come from the supermarket. I said, you're sitting in here with chickens. I had to explain that no, eggs actually come out of a chicken's backside. And then, of course, the kids were horrified. So it's a challenge, even on such a simple level, to get people who have not been exposed to these concepts to understand these are natural cycles. Just like the weather is a natural cycle and climate is a natural cycle. And if we want to survive and thrive and even just get through this period ahead of us, we have to acknowledge that this is the way the world works. We've been separated from it, but this is the way the world works. That's why we take animals and it is how a lot of people. Your turn.
Yeah, it's a sad state of affairs. My last activism stint in Philadelphia, I started a nonprofit that taught some of the poorest communities how to grow food on the vacant lots between their houses. And there's a lot of old fruit trees in Philadelphia, and the kids didn't know that the peaches were safe to eat on the trees. Their parents had told them that they were dirty. And they all thought that the food in the supermarket was clean. So I had to explain to them that the food in the supermarket could have a potential of 93 different toxic chemicals on it, and that the peaches on this tree had 0. And so it's like our youth believes the exact opposite of what's going on, which will be a sad state of affairs when this event unfolds, and they have no idea what's going on, and they're looking at a tree of fruit in the front yard, and they think it's dirty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it is.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's sad. It's really sad because it's such a disconnect from reality. And we've created it ourselves. We made this society. So I feel responsible. Not in a totally responsible way, but it's important to help people understand. Now I'm done.
So now that we're talking about preparedness, it's important for those that are preparing to know what they're preparing, meaning what their supplies consist of. Can you talk to our listeners about keeping records and why they're important?
Because, and this may seem astonishing, in a cupboard right now, you will forget what you've got, and you will forget where you put it. If you have, say, 50 cans of tomatoes, maybe you can pile them all in one cupboard. Maybe you can't. And if you can't, you have to find a place you can put them where you won't. And it is very, suppose you've got potatoes, tomatoes, corn, beans, some pickles, some pickled eggs, some cans of tuna. You can see how this can stack up pretty fast. Several 5-gallon buckets of grains or popcorn or flour. And if you haven't labeled those and written yourself a list and keeping that list up to date with a statement of where it is and how much is in it, you will lose track. And when you lose track, you're going to waste money because at some point you'll think, geez, I don't know if I've got any pickles left. I better go get some. And pretty soon you've got 60 jars of pickles that you wouldn't eat in the next 5 years. It's not bad to understand what I'm saying. Keep it to plan for your next purchase and see your consumption. Maybe you use a lot of cans of tuna. Maybe you don't use any. But if you don't watch your rate of consumption, you won't know. And I'm not saying to be obsessive about it, but you need a good general idea. And that list will help you maintain that good general idea. Does that sound right to you?
You were breaking up, but the 60% I heard sounded excellent. Now, one of the things I want to discuss is so if you're not thinking it all through, and this is for our listeners, you're going to get into prepping, you're going to buy all this stuff and jam it into containers, start stockpiling water, you're going to hide it from your spouse, keep it in the closet, make the list. What if your oven is electric and you didn't think that through? So you really have to think about how you're cooking and how you're going to be preparing this food. So if you're in an area where you if your gas cut off or your electric could get cut off, how are you going to cook the food? If you didn't think about that, then you have this stockpile of a year's worth of supplies and no way to cook it. You'll look very silly in the end. So in your book, you cover a nice section. You can run out to Walmart right now. It's the beginning of camping season at the Walmart down here for $29. You can pick up a Coleman double burner stove and some propane canisters, and you can practice how to cook on a portable system that you can slide in there with your supplies. And I thought that was an excellent thing you bring up in your book. Can you add anything to that?
Yes. A lot of times when we begin prepping, we start with something that seems obvious to us, which is I want to have power. I want the grid. I want light. I want to make sure my computer is on, my cell phone. And so people will often revert to thinking about solar, which is a good thing, or whatever, instead of a very basic thing. It's not having your computer on that's important. It's having something to eat and drink and a means to cook it. You're exactly right there. We need to back up to what do you need to survive no matter what. If the power's down, if the gas is critical, and if you start from that in your thinking about it, it will often lead you to the right answers. And what do you do during the day? Just look around. What do you absolutely need to live? You got to cook your food unless you don't mind eating cold stuff right out of a can. But if you've got dried beans, you can't eat them just directly. They have to be cooked. They have to be cooked to soften them, or you're going to crack teeth, and now you've got another problem. So, yes, you're absolutely right with that. Start with that basic camp stove, and then play with it. You need to know how to use it. You don't want your first use to be when you're really, really hungry and the lights are out. You want to know how to handle that baby no matter what's going on around you. So I think that's a really good place to start.
Right, and there is the simple grill. Almost anywhere, even an apartment will have a balcony. You can buy a cheap grill. I'm not talking a gas grill. A gas grill would work if you want to stockpile some propane tanks. But the $30 grill with the grill screen, you can just walk into a nearby wooded area or get some unpainted wood from the alleyway and use regular wood as your charcoal. And we're talking in a long-term survival situation where you don't need to stockpile charcoal or any of that. There's going to be forest products nearby that you could probably gather. So you could cook for long periods of time just using wood and a grill. And that could keep you alive and thriving for a very long time with no money used in stockpiling except to buy the grill, which you're going to cook on. And then to add to that, so what do you think about cooking on one of those grills? And additionally, if you have a wood-burning stove in your house, it's a no-brainer. You should get familiar with maybe using that to cook a few products because they get hot and it takes practice.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. I kind of lost you at the end of your comment there, but those grills are fabulous, and you can use them on the weekend. Invite your friends over. Let's throw some meat on the grill and see what we can get, or some vegetables or some corn. So to prepare, it can be incorporated into your lifestyle and enhance your lifestyle at the same time. One of the favorite experiments I used to have is to invite people to come over, and I would just take a bunch of random cans or preserve stuff and set them on the counter and say, let's cook. This is what we got. So you're getting to make a meal out of a whole bunch of stuff and figure out how to turn it into something tasty that everyone enjoys, or most people enjoy. Let us not forget the value of a good soup. You just open those cans and dump them all together and mix them up, and more often than not, it's edible. Might not be fabulous, but it's a good experience. Does that answer what?
Let's talk about fabulous then. Let's talk about fabulous. How do we prep for fabulous? Because you're talking about Iron Chef prepper style there. How can we actually prepare to survive and thrive? If we're growing our own food, we won't need to take some old, outdated cans and throw them together to make some concoction that will keep us alive. We could actually be sprouting micrograins and be living healthy and storing food that we can and on, so that we know what we're cooking and that we can actually have recipes. So how important is it to produce your own food, or start learning how to produce your own food, even if you're in an apartment right now?
You know, I can't emphasize enough how important that is. Even, as you said, in buckets on your balcony, in an apartment, you need to understand the growing cycle. How food goes from a seed into a plant and converts into something you can eat is fundamental not only to your long-term survival, but it's fundamental to being a complete human being. If you don't know where your food comes, you're handicapped. You're horribly handicapped in living in the real world, not the built world, but the real physical world that the rest of the planet inhabits. I want to differentiate between the immediate needs food storage, and that's where we're looking at getting a whole bunch of canned goods and dried beans and wheat and flour and what have you, and putting that aside. Your policy, you're cheaper than most people during 1 month for health insurance. And you can buy that and it will last years past any situation. Once you have that backup food insurance policy, you can experiment with your garden. You can experiment to a point. If you're totally dependent on your garden area, you better have your knowledge down, because you will not be able to grow the food, all the food you need the first year. It won't happen. I'll tell you a story. When I started growing a garden, I lived in Los Angeles. And I had a little backyard, and it was in an area that had once been devoted to growing garbanzo beans. So there was a lot of foot and a half, 18 feet. So here I am in the, and I put in my little garden. Everything grew like crazy because the weather's perfect. And what was interesting was that there really wasn't any insect damage. We had tomato worms. That was our primary insect, but no cabbage loopers, no blister beetles, nothing. It was free of insects because we're in the middle of a concrete jungle. So at the time I thought, goodness, organic growing is so easy. Why doesn't everybody grow organically? Why aren't there giant organic farms all over the place? Yeah, when we moved to the country and we discovered that's where all the bugs lived that wanted to eat tomatoes, that craved potato tops, then you come to understand it always isn't a benign growing situation. And that's when the weather was fine. There was no serious changes in the weather. And even then we had hail that knocked down our corn. Now, goodness, what was it in India? How many hectares, which is 2.5 acres, I think? 400
million.
Yeah. So that's over 1 million acres. Their crops are gone. I can't even imagine people thinking everything's gone. It's gone. It's horrifying. It really is. So that's the importance of getting something growing. And I believe I recommend in the book, and I continue to recommend it to people now, is you need to grow a good percentage of your crops underground. Those are tubers of various kinds, potatoes, beets, turnips, even if you don't like them. Rutabagas, which are surprisingly good, radishes, things underground so that if you do get that terrifically bad hailstorm and lose all your zucchinis and your corn and everything else that's above ground, those underground crops will come back and you will still have a harvest. You might not be happy with it, but you can eat unhappily and survive rather than have nothing to eat.
Plus, the subsurface, the root vegetables, they store the longest, so they're the most practical in a survival situation to store long term because they won't spoil if you simply keep them in a cool, dark place.
I lost you at the end there, Diamond, but I'm going to add along that root vegetables. We had carrots this year that I purposefully left in the garden to see how they would weather being out there. Usually we would pull the carrots and set some back to save for seed. This year, much to my surprise, we had -8 degrees here for a couple of days. It was much colder than usual. The carrots came through. The little tops are growing now. Now, of course, this year, if I leave them in the ground, they will go to seed, so they won't be all that good for eating. But, you know, I'm kind of spoiled by eating first-year carrots. If I absolutely had to, if we had to, we'd eat second-year carrots. We'd probably eat the tops on them, too.
Yeah, the second-year carrots are very edible in the beginning of the spring of the second year. Sometimes they'll start to rot, but they will all seed. And that's important for seed saving. So it's important to start to understand all these techniques, which we will talk about growing food exclusively in the second hour. And we've got 9 more minutes here. I want to discuss a little experiment that you have, that you talk about in your book. So after you are able to prepare enough water and food and you've got your supplies for 3 months or a year, pretty much stockpiled, you suggest doing an experiment where you go for 1 week with your family only on the supplies. And I love that. And I would even add to that you also you turn the electric off and you turn the computer off and all that. Can you talk about how important it is to actually practicing these type of events and doing a role play so that you're ready when they happen? Because I remember when I was a kid and listening to you when I heard the rebroadcast of our show, I remember doing the fire drills and my grandmom and all those people always saying, "What if this happens?" And then you all pretend to, if the house catches on fire, what you do. So can you talk about how important it is to role play the disaster scenario after you think you're prepared?
Mm-hmm. This is your best learning experience of all. You've got all of your good stuff there piled up and you're looking at it and saying, I can live off of this for years. And then you try it. Try it seriously. Don't buy anything during that week when you're out. If you're going to work and you fill your gas, don't stop in for that big gulp. Don't get that little donut they got in the morning, because if you need to experience, like, the only food you have is what you have in your house. Cook your own. If you don't know how to cook dried beans and turn them into a tasty meal, that's a good time to learn. You will spend a lot of time with your food, and you will discover that no matter how good your planning was, you didn't get some really bad. I'll tell you, this really came out of my own experience years ago when we were up on the farm and we had a terrific ice storm and froze us in. The ice was 5 or 6 inches deep. You could not walk on it. You could not drive on it. The mailman didn't even bother to do his route. Nobody went out. And we had plenty of food stored up. I lived on a farm. There's always food there. But what we didn't have was potato chips, and we didn't have any chocolate. And I mean, potato chips is not a big part of our diet, but all of a sudden you start going, oh man, I would really love to have a Snickers bar right now. Oh man, I wish I had some chips. We had popcorn and we could do that, but it's not the same. And when you're in that stressful situation, just having something pleasant and familiar and maybe extravagant like that makes all the difference in the world. It really does. So that's what you'll learn. Can't learn it by listening to me or hearing somebody else talk about it. You'll only learn it in your gut by doing it and seeing what works for you. Might be you really badly crave something fresh. I would kill for a grape and you don't have any. So what do you do then? So that's how you learn. That's how you learn. You think so, Diamond?
Yeah, I also think that changing our mindset on what we perceive as entertainment is important, because during that same role play, you're going to realize that there's no internet, there's no Netflix. You should really shut all that off. And maybe we can really get back to building relationships with our families and having real conversations about how everyone feels and what they want to do. Learn how to play a board game again. Those are amazingly fun and take up hours of time, and they really stimulate your brain. Card games, arts, read books. These are all things that we will go back to, which is why the last time it got cold, we called the Renaissance. There was incredible works of art and literature that came out of this time, the Stradivarius violin, and many other fantastic leaps and bounds happened in this time when you actually were with your thoughts and your brain and your mind, and there were no inane distractions, which seems to be our entire society these days.
Mm-hmm. Very true. There were two brothers who were... okay.
Hold that thought.
Okay.
We'll be right back in 4 minutes, guys. Hang with us.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Join me weekdays for my new show, Tell Chris Joe. This is going to be a problem show brought to you live from Kensington. Thursdays, I'm dealing with hot topics, heated debate, what's new around the world, and ring-ins to discuss listeners' problems and offering considered and heartfelt solutions. So join me, Chris Hart, for Tell Chris Joe. Stop what you're doing, grab a cup of tea, and coming live from Kensington. Relax, let me entertain you with a coffee bar online. Listeners' very personal problems. So that's Thursdays, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. See you there. It's going to be lots of fun.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good evening, folks. It's time, and we're back with the Inconvenient Truth, prepping for the Grand Solar Minimum with our guest, Dr. Anita Bailey. We're having connectivity issues, and I understand we've been working on it. I got my end secured this week, and hopefully next week we could fix both ends. So just bear with us the next hour. You're going to glean an amazing amount of information, even though the signal is slightly jumbled. We're going to be talking about food production, producing your own food. In the first hour, we covered obtaining and storing food and water as being the primary consideration for the coming events to allow your family to survive and thrive. Now, I think that producing your own food in the long term is going to be mandatory for everyone that wants to survive and thrive in the long term here. And what I mean by that is, even if you are producing your own food, you have nothing to lose if nothing changes. Because what we're seeing right now is some crop losses worldwide that are going to cause the food production to spike, the food prices to spike because of lack of production. And that's going to start to hit people in the pocketbook. Now, these are the very same people that are going to be preparing for what's coming. So you're going to really have a pinch in your pocketbook as the food prices come up. The prices for preparing are going to follow. So if you are in a position to be supplying your family with 10, 20, 30% of the food you're eating, or you can just go and rely on the food you're producing, even if you don't like it, like Anita says, you can be saving a lot of money and be using that money to prepare dried goods for what's coming. So any way you look at this, preparing is a win-win situation for your family, because most things that you buy today will never be that price ever again, including dry goods moving forward. So it's just an investment in the future. Do you have any great introductory thoughts on food production as we dive into it, Anita?
Food production is an art, it's a science, and it is a joyful hobby. It doesn't have to be painful. It can be a source of learning and discovery at the same time, especially if you have little kids who for the first time in their life put a bean seed in the ground and come back in a couple days and find that something green has grown from it. And even for us adults, that can be a delightful experience. Every year I've been growing stuff for put those seeds in the ground. I'd love to dig them up and see if they're growing, but don't. Then one day you come out and their little heads are poking out of the ground, and all is well with the world at that point. Found satisfaction in growing food, and especially when you bring in the first heart into your kitchen. And you taste that tomato that exists only because you put the seed in the ground and nurtured it to bring that tomato to life. And the flavor is so far beyond what you can find in any supermarket or even in a farmer's market, because it's fresher than fresh. It just walked in from being on the plant. I don't want to make gardening sound like it's just drudgery, because it's not. There is an element of work, but mild work and keep in shape. So there's a lot of pluses to growing things beyond just having food. What do you think, Diamond?
Well, the motto of our nonprofit was food is free if you grow it. And that basically comes down to the truth, because if you capture water from rain and you really price out how much it costs for a mustard seed, a single mustard seed costs less than a penny, and a mustard plant will provide a human with tons of nutrition for weeks. So food is free when you grow it in a general sense. It's basically costs very little to grow food. But what you're going to notice if you need a high learning curve to start growing food now if you haven't. But what I'm going to tell everyone is that failure is what you should expect. The farmer is only successful through his failures. And I have a license plate on the front of my UTV that says Born to Farm. And I'm a scientist. I only recently changed to a farmer because farming is innate. Providing yourself with the cleanest, most quality, healthful food product for you and your family to eat should be a no-brainer. If you do some quick studies on what is accepted in modern agriculture, you would be very reluctant to feed your family the food that you're buying at the supermarket without properly washing it for tens of minutes, because most of the food in the supermarket, even the organic food, is contaminated with pesticides and herbicides that cause a whole gamut of health problems in the human species. It's only recently, since the 1950s, that we've been saturating food in poisons, and our society was a lot healthier prior to that because of the quality of the food. Now, unfortunately, we didn't have the modern medicine back then, so it would be interesting to see how much longer we would have lived in the 1900s to the 1950s with modern medicine as compared to today. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, medicine's a very complex issue, and as you know, I've got a strong background in the healthcare field. When I went into healthcare, I was as starry-eyed as anybody could be. And when I was a kid, we had a wonderful family doctor. He truly was a great humanitarian, a great human being. And I expected the medical profession to be filled with people like him, and it's not. There are good people in medicine who have a faith in the modern system that's hard to understand when all it takes is a little research, and you can see there's a lot of cracks in this system. It's held up by faith right now, not by science anymore. I'll get off of that soapbox because I wanted to address the food preservatives and what's in our food. One way you can clearly see how different supermarket food is to buy a green pepper in the supermarket. And they're beautiful and they're not terribly expensive. And they're probably $1.70 each, something like that, which is crazy high. But bring one of those home and set it on your counter. And if you've grown a green pepper, something similar, set it next to it. The one you grew will be sure. The other one will look brand new and perfect. Why is that? Well, the one that came out of your garden is actually alive. It's got life in it, and after it's picked, it says, I have to turn into seeds for the next generation. So it starts to shrivel up. The moisture goes out of the skin, and it begins that process. The supermarket one, what's on it so that it can't respirate, it can't breathe, it can't follow this process? Wax, carnauba wax, they used to put that on it. I don't know if they do anymore. How come And then that one supermarket one will start getting black spots on it, and it starts to rot. It no longer can complete that normal process. Something bad happened to that green pepper. So it's the same thing with other foods. Oh, those avocados that are coming in from Mexico, the berries that come in from other places. Outside of the United States, virtually everything that comes in is irradiated. It has to be to kill insects. And at the same time, it changes the food product itself. You can't hardly grow a little household avocado from those seeds anymore. I used to do that as a kid all the time. Just take a seed out and plunk it in some water, you get yourself a little green plant. I've been fighting my avocado seeds. I got 2 out of 30 that I planted. So I don't know, those 2 might have just been the lucky ones at the bottom of the pile when they were radiating. But something's different with commercial food that isn't necessarily great for us. It's great for getting these beautiful things into the market, and their goal is making their money. I can't fault them, because when I worked, my goal was making money too. But that doesn't mean it's good food. Looks great, but it doesn't mean it's good for you.
Yeah, let's cut to the chase. That food tastes like crap. It doesn't taste like vegetables. Almost none of it tastes good. It has a slight hint of flavor of the vegetable they're claiming it is. But when you can sit a pepper out on the table and it sits there for 6 weeks and doesn't change, and then by the 7th week it turns into a moldy mess and it won't even grow a plant. And the fact of the avocado seeds not sprouting, I have been so frustrated on this topic because I love to grow avocado trees, and I want to have a geothermal greenhouse here that produces avocados. And in order to do that, I need lots of avocado trees. And just like you said, 30 seeds and 3 or 4 kind of crappy trees growing out of them, and you're like, what has happened to the avocados? Mm-hmm. It's the chemicals and the irradiation. Being a scientist, and I've studied for about a decade the information, the cutting-edge information coming out, because when I got into activism, it was to understand the genetic modification process better and to understand what they were doing with our food. What I quickly uncovered led to organizing the March Against Monsanto in Philadelphia with hundreds of thousands of others worldwide in 2012. We began that march. And since then, what you find out about the food industry, how it's connected to the pharmaceutical industry, and how it's connected through a revolving door through our federal government and the FDA, you start to get very leery about putting any food that they deem safe into your mouth. If you dive a little deeper into the information, as far as the pharmaceutical industry, you're going to find that the pharmaceutical industry is not helping anything. They're simply there as a cog in the wheel to create the billions of dollars running the machine. In the end, everything your grandmother probably told you is true. You are what you eat, and the most important thing you can do for your body is to put food inside of it that will keep it healthy. And unfortunately, almost nothing you can buy at the supermarket is healthy. It's all tainted in some way. It's been stomped on, stepped on, or run down a conveyor belt, which has some toxin on it that you're probably going to take up. So growing your own food is a no-brainer in these times if you want to be actually putting health into your body. Health starts with the gut. Gut bacteria is the key to human health. Eating a probiotic diet that is grown by yourself using organic methods with maximum nutrition equals complete body health, a long life, living to 80, almost no rheumatoid arthritis, and just, a wonderful lifestyle. This has been proven by groups that live in the Himalayas that are disease-free because they have optimum organic food sources, and they just don't have inflammatory diseases like we do because of this stupid empire model that we're all slaves to. How do you feel about that?
Yes, I definitely would agree with that. And it's very hard for a person living in a city to make a transition to that kind of lifestyle. First, because they don't have the knowledge how to do that. And so we end up reliant on purchased items. Health food stores used to be, in my youth, the health food store was a place you went to meet really strange, wacky people who, the sun nudists and the people who believed if you only ate fruit, you would have a higher spiritual vibration. I mean, they can be very nice people, but they get strange ideas. And I like fruit, so I'm not criticizing that. But today, a health food store is pretty much like a supermarket. You can find things in there that are labeled organic. And unfortunately, some recent studies have shown that even some of the big name organic brands are loaded with glyphosate, which is crops. Now, you can have a wheat crop, for example, that is organically
Anita,
grown.
you just got
organic.
cut off. Anita, you got cut off at glyphosate, and I think that our people need to hear about that. So talk about, again, the quality food products that actually have glyphosate in them. Can you start from there?
Okay, yes. A study was done. I don't want to name any product names, but they found that there is glyphosate in them. Now, glyphosate is a chemical that is used to uniformly ripen grain crops and other crops. So it's a false ripening. And what it is, it makes it easier to harvest. So you can have, for example, a crop of wheat that is grown on organic soil, that is raised with organic fertilizers and no chemical pesticides. And then when they're ready to harvest it, and they're harvesting thousands of acres at a time, they're not harvesting an acre in their backyard. They spray it with glyphosate so everything ripens simultaneously. Now, this is not a benign chemical. That so-called ripening is actually what the plant interprets as, I'm going to die. I'm dying right now. My leaves are drying up, so I better ripen my seeds as quickly as I can. So that chemical, which is as anti-organic as anything can be, in product. And they didn't use a chemical fertilizer, and they didn't use a chemical pesticide. So we have to realize that this is an industry. Food is an industry, and the people who are producing it don't necessarily always eat it themselves. Or if they do, they may also believe some of the mythology that's grown up around it. You know, there's a great, really an excellent video that is available. I believe it's on Netflix. I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube, called King Corn. And it is about the corn industry. And there you'll see real corn farmers saying, I don't eat my corn. This stuff is, I wouldn't even put that in my mouth. Real farmers saying that. And then the corn that is then used to feed cattle, they're talking about the cattle have to be slaughtered at a certain age because they're going to die. They're going to die from being so toxic from the feed they're fed. So, and I mean, you know, it's one thing to eat an animal that's aging itself closer to death. And a lot of times on a beef ranch like we have here, when we get an old cow who's past her prime and she's not going to make it through another cold year, she ends up in the freezer as hamburger. Now, she's grass raised, so she's just old. But if you're feeding the animal something that's making their body so toxic that they cannot even live past a certain age, and then you're going to eat them, what do you think you're eating? You're eating something that's horribly unhealthy, not just for them, but for you. Okay,
well, let's just dive into glyphosate because I know I have extensive knowledge on glyphosate. First of all, glyphosate is the trademark Roundup, which they started selling in the 1980s as a biodegradable weed killer, which you can spray around your picnic and safely around your children on your sidewalk. And that was quickly shut down in the courts because it turns out glyphosate is toxic. And 2 decades later, since the introduction of glyphosate by Monsanto to the mainstream, which they purported to be biodegradable and safe, which it is neither, it is now coming to light that it causes a whole gamut of cancers. Dozens of cancers are linked to glyphosate. Now, glyphosate, which is Roundup, is a chelator, so it's not necessarily a pesticide or an herbicide, but what it is a literal life noose. And when I mean noose, I mean Noose. It's a choking mechanism. Glyphosate, a chelator, if you look up chelation in an organic chemistry book, it prevents the uptake of other minerals into the biological life form. So what it literally does is it makes a sicker plant product, and that's how it kills the weeds, by simply choking off the nutrition. Now they're saturating all of the genetically modified crops with glyphosate, which is clearly chelating the plants. So all the corn, soybean, and all the other genetically modified crops that are getting into processed food are completely devoid of nutrition. And then they're going ahead and spraying it as a mitigation technique that is legal on organic and other food crops to extend the life of these crops as an agricultural practice. So according to agriculture, it is an agricultural practice to make food less nutritious for the entire population, which, by the way, goes into their gut, and their gut bacteria takes that up, and it replicates the chelated gene associated with glyphosate. So in a sense, it's chelating all humans and preventing all humans that eat any of the glyphosate-tainted food from taking up nutrition into their bodies, as well as the cows and other livestock that get fed the glyphosate-tainted, genetically modified foodstuffs that they're now feeding all of our animals. So what you have is a huge circular system of nutrition depletion, which is sickening the populations of all of our farm animals and all of our humans, which, by the way, is a boon for the pharmaceutical industry. So if you're listening out there and you're still eating things that are claimed organic or even over-the-counter foods or anything in a box or a package, you are killing yourself and your family slowly. You're not going to get sick tomorrow from eating a box of Cheerios or Corn Pops, but you're certainly going to suffer from inflammatory disease for the rest of your life. And I guarantee your medicine cabinet is filled with pharmaceuticals that they are trying to keep you alive with. The same as the cows. The only difference is they can't euthanize the population, but I think they're working towards that.
Well, that's a horrifying thought all the way around. I'm not really a conspiracy person because I think bad people can't work with each other well. Money has a power over people, and it's easy to look away when your salary depends on something. And it is unfortunate that the connections between these industries is so strong, because when you start, Bayer, the aspirin manufacturer, was a big seed producer. They just sold off part of their seed production capacity. So why is a medicine company investing in seeds? You start seeing the connections and you go, this doesn't look right. And even if it's just doesn't look right and it's truly not working that way, it shouldn't not look right. You know what I'm saying? If it looks like smoke, it's probably a fire somewhere out there. So I hate to go there in my thinking. I still have that little sparkly-eyed young person in my head that says, but they're in medicine, they're good people. And it's hard to get past that training. And I think for our very survival, long-term, we have to relying on ourselves to take care of our health, our meals, our family education, and our security. Because if we do, we're going down their road. And I don't know where that road leads, but I know it's not a good place.
Not a good place. That is a very good way to put it there. So let's talk about some solutions. We have 35 minutes to talk about what can our listeners start to do to learn about producing their own food. And I'm going to quick jump out here, and having saturated myself in the organic farming world, starting with researching the topic for 3 years on permaculture principles and what that means, and the different growing zones, and the different triads and groups of different stories of the forest, and how that relates to creating systems which are self-sustaining that you don't have to get involved in once they're started, is really a key to learning about food production for you and your family. So I would suggest anyone out there that wants to start, look up the permaculture principles, and you'll start to see how it's more of a way of life than actually a job or a hobby growing food. That being said, there are some easy ways to get your feet wet. You could simply go out to the store and buy some potting soil and some seeds, and use some containers that you are going to recycle as pots, and start growing stuff, putting them in sunny windows, putting them outside. I would suggest getting some of the books that Anita recommends. Any introductory book on growing would be a great place to start. But the best place to start in your area is at your local extension office, where they can tell you what the most successful crops in your area are and what all your neighbors are growing. You can also ask your neighbors if you're not a recluse. They'll be happy to tell you at length what they believe is to be the best thing to grow. Now, from my experience, I can tell everyone out there, it doesn't matter where you live, if you're scared about growing, and you, like many people I've heard say, I don't have a green thumb, you're just fooling yourself. Drop that thought, because having a green thumb isn't an accidental skill that you were genetically born with. It is a process of trial and error. The standard farmer and gardener loses everything all the time, and it's their persistence that makes them appear to be extremely successful. What they do is they trick the system in their area, and they accidentally find out what grows well without any help. And that's through a process of trial and error. Once you've mastered the things that are easy to grow, it looks like you're a genius. And so that's how growing goes. Now, that being said, there are some very simple things that you can grow that are edible, that even if you don't know what you're doing, you're guaranteed to be a success. And that first plant is called a radish. The radish family is harvestable in a month and a week. Typically within 40 days they're done, and they require no skill in growing. You can make a mistake, plant them too deep, plant them too shallow. As long as you add water, 80% of all radish seeds will sprout, even the ones you left on the surface because you don't know what you're doing. And so it's a good way to get a good result from your first accident. Also, almost all beans are simple to grow if it's warm enough. Beans are not a good thing for the grand solar minimum because they're sensitive to heat, and if you have a frost, all your beans are dead and you're screwed. So the root vegetables are really what you want to stick with. But if you're just dabbling and you want to plant your first seeds, I recommend you get a pack of lettuce seeds and some radish seeds. Just throw them on the surface of the dirt, stir it up, water it, and go from there. Do you have any other suggestions, Anita, that you'd like to add?
I think those are great suggestions. There is no better learning system than getting your hands dirty and getting out there and actually giving it a try. I don't recall if I mentioned this the last time we chatted, but one of the kind of saddest things I've seen in many years was I was at a Lowe's and an older fella, probably, retirement age, clearly, had worked in some kind of business. He was well dressed, had nice shoes. And he was asking one of the clerks about one of these large pots with a cherry tomato plant in it. The kind they have later in the season where the plant has grown pretty good. It's got little green cherry tomatoes all over it. And the fellow was saying, well, how many tomatoes can I get from this? And, the clerk is going, well, as many as it'll produce. And the guy's, well, how do I take care of it? Do I have to water it, or do I just leave it outside? And the clerk is as baffled as I was. And I'm going, it's a cherry tomato plant. Just get out of its way and it will mob you with tomatoes. And yet this man, 5-6 decades of life, and he had no idea how to produce food. And to me, that's almost heartbreaking. Cherry tomato is a good thing to start with too. That's, like I said, you put those seeds in the ground, you just get out of the way, because those things are going to come up, and you're going to be, your friends will be running away from you when they see you coming with a bag of tomatoes for them. So another thing that's easy to get to sprout, but not necessarily easy to bring to harvest, is zucchini. Once it's out of the ground, it's sensitive to a lot of different insect pests and funguses and things like that. So if you want a little more challenging plant, zucchini's good. And once that plant is producing, again, it's something your friends are going to run away from you when they see you with your bags of zucchini. For root vegetables, I like potatoes. I like them because they are fairly resilient, as long as you don't over-fertilize them. Not too much of your human manure or any other kind of manure on them, because it'll grow a luxuriant top and no tubers. So potatoes can tolerate pretty poor soil. Stick a potato in the ground. A supermarket potato is fine if it's started to sprout. Just watch what happens. In 6 weeks or so, you can dig away a little bit of soil around the base of that green plant, and you'll find some little bitty potatoes there. Those are new potatoes. And you can take 2 or 3 off of every plant, and whoo-wee, now you're a gardener. So there are multiple things. Use your good sense. If you don't eat potatoes or don't like them, don't grow it. But that radish, there is a variety of radish that's called the 18-day radish, and it will give you a radish in 18 days. They're not all uniform size or shape. A good source for seeds is a company called Baker Seed Company right here in Missouri. Rareseeds.com. Get their catalog first. And they have a lot of good growing tips, beautiful pictures. Oh my gosh. Of the various kinds of things. They are organically grown, certified non-GMO. These are good seeds. And you will spend some money because they are not cheap. Ounce for ounce seeds probably are the same cost as gold now, or silver at least, because getting good seeds requires good growing practices, and that takes more time and energy for the grower. So once you got your seeds, though, your open pollinated seed. Let me talk for a moment about the difference between the kinds of seeds, if you don't mind, Diamond.
Oh, please do.
Okay. When you read a seed package, you're going to see different terminologies associated with the seeds themselves. One of the words you will see on there is hybrid. Hybrid means it is a cross between different family lines.
Do not buy hybrids.
What? I'm sorry.
Do not buy hybrids ever.
Right. Now, let me tell you a little bit about hybrids. It's kind of like taking a purebred collie dog and crossing it with a purebred bloodhound. The result is a hybrid. The puppies that come out of that isn't a collie. It's not a bloodhound. You don't know quite what you're going to get. The difference now with hybrid seeds is that a lot of times they have had things bred into them that prevent them from producing the next generation. They may be sterile. So you get a single generation of something good, and the next generation, you don't know what you're going to get, if anything. So hybrid is not a good choice for long-term use. You can't save your seeds.
Could I break in for just a second?
Yes.
We at the station offer 34,500 seeds for $100 donation, and it's 56 varieties of vegetables.
That's
and they're all
heirloom
seeds.
And you can find that on the website, I guess.
Yes, sir, on the homepage, www.revolution.radio.
So you hear that, listeners? You can get a whole seed vault for $100 donation, which is going to support the radio station, keep guests like Anita Bailey and hosts like Diamond on the air. So go ahead, if you need to get a good selection, make a donation to the radio station and keep it running. Where were you at, Anita?
Okay, the next variety is something called open pollinated. Open pollinated are what you want. And sometimes these will be described as heirloom seeds, although not all heirloom seeds are open pollinated. But that's probably getting closer to what you're looking for. Open pollinated means that it is produced from seed, and it will produce seed that will produce the same kind of plant. So an open pollinated tomato is one called Rutgers, after the university, and it's actually probably over 100 years old. I think it was developed in the 1920s. So every time you plant a seed from your tomato plants, you will get the same kind of tomato, the same thing. That's open pollinated. Let me see, hybrid. F1, sometimes you'll see that on a package. That's a first generation hybrid. And sometimes they'll hide the fact that it's a hybrid by just calling it an F1 seed. So you really have to read your seed packages and get an idea of what your long-term goal is. You just want to grow something this year and don't care about the future? Get your hybrids. I wouldn't, because I don't know how much seeds are going to cost next year, and I'll bet they cost more than this year.
Right, and the key here is seed saving. If you want to survive and thrive, you have to learn how to seed save. In order to seed save, all you have to do is leave one or two of your vegetable crops without harvesting. You don't harvest them, and you usually pick one of your best ones. And what that will produce is the mimic seed of that open pollinated variety, an heirloom or not. And if you pick the best one of all of the seeds, you're going to get the best seed for the best crop for the next year. So what you get is the most viable version of almost a clone of itself, but you can actually improve the crops year after year by saving the best of the crop every year. And this is why some of the heirloom varieties are so resilient and so amazing to grow, because they have been seed saved, where they're actually saving the cream of the crop of the entire harvest to plant the next year. And this is one of the keys of the permaculture principles and learning how to grow food. You won't know how to seed save unless you take a class or you do this for a process of a year or more. There is not a lot of time to prepare, so you need to start doing this spring in the Northern Hemisphere. It's interesting, you were talking about how difficult zucchini is and how easy something else was. That's only true for where you are, Anita, because permaculture principles change mile by mile, meter by meter, state by state, region by region, and the same place at 46 degrees north latitude on the East Coast is going to grow a completely different crop at 46 degrees north latitude on the West Coast. The same thing happens on my property, where in the front yard I can grow things that will grow in Alaska, and in the back of the property I have to grow things that would grow in Arizona, because we have microclimates here. So getting to know the lay of your land by process of elimination and trial and error and failure is key to the permaculture principle. So out here we have no humidity. and no issues with really fungus and things like that. So our zucchini and our squash crops are the simplest things to grow. Once it's above freezing, if you put a squash seed in the ground, each plant will produce 50 pounds of squash or more, and you will be inundated with squash. Whereas not a single human in Pagosa Springs can grow a tomato outside. You might be able to get one or two, but you'll have 10,000 pounds of green tomatoes. It is critical to have a greenhouse and climate control to do tomatoes and peppers here. They're virtually impossible. But potatoes, there are no blights, no bugs. The only thing going after potatoes here are pocket gophers. So if you line your beds with wire mesh, you have an amazing bumper crop of potatoes. So each region has its own bumper crop. You should try to figure out what that is in your region. It's easy to do if you go to your local extension office, which is from the agricultural extension from the federal government, unfortunately, but usually run by locals that are very nice and helpful. You can source seed that has been proven from the year before. At my extension, they offer seed potatoes, up to 5 varieties, including Colorado Blue and Mountain Pink, just all the wonderful varieties that were bumper crops the year before. They have available for 50 cents a pound for the public. So these are all resources you should be looking into, and you should be trying to fail at what you're doing, because that's the key to success. Do you have anything else to add?
I totally agree with you. Extension is a really good resource. And when you do have your crops in, they've got all kinds of instructions on home food preserving and canning and all of that stuff. And it's free. That's the best part. You can pick up pamphlets and information. You may even be able to get it offline because our tax dollars pay for this. So that's a resource we don't want to forget about. One little challenge with that is that they are oriented toward the traditional modern agriculture. And so you're going to see, spray this and use this chemical fertilizer. If you can get around that, then you're going to be fine.
Yeah, and in fact, I walked in and told them we're no spray, no chemicals. What can we get here? And they're very helpful with us here because that's a new trend. There are a lot of people that are trying to grow food completely chemical-free like we're doing here at the farm. And it's not only possible, but it's been proven to be the most effective way to grow food by increasing biodiversity, the insect count. You actually reduce pests and you get a greater yield. And this was proven at the Rodale Institute up in Pennsylvania. Over decades of research. If you guys don't know about the Rodale Institute, please Google it, Rodale. They were one of the first publishing houses in the 1800s that published the first gardening books in existence in North America. They have a long history of research, and you haven't heard about it because modern agriculture has simply stomped them to the ground. Because they claim that GMOs are going to feed the world. That's nonsense. GMOs toxify the soil. They deplete the soil. They fail within a decade, and new ones need to be invented. This is simply a mechanism that a multinational corporation can drive a profit model where a seed is associated with a chemical coming from the chemical industry to drive a model to make billions of dollars to make you all sick and go to the doctor. So I believe that the key to the future is learning how to grow food for your family, and that all of the innovation in growing food sustainably in a permaculture environment where you're actually fertilizing with the crops and using biodynamic systems to create abundance using forest models is the way of the future. Do you have anything to add as far as permaculture is concerned or seed saving that I didn't cover? Because you really get into it in Chapter 6.
Permaculture is really a wonderful system. And for someone who is just at the phase of their life where they're starting to put a seed into a pot, it is some your hand. And that is your practical learning there. And then aim toward what you're going to do with your land. Read about it, because it's different than just putting in rows and rows and rows of corn or whatever. Your plants become integrated and they work with each other, and the bacteria on the roots of one plant help feed the plant next to it, and the mushrooms can grow in there, and you don't have to go out to the woods to harvest your morels or morels, as whatever you're calling them, because they're growing right in your garden. And that relationship between plants is truly the natural state. Growing in rows is not a natural state. It's something we developed out of the need for commercial agriculture. It's one way to get food, and it's better than nothing. But in the long run, aim toward that permaculture. On seed saving, when you get your first harvest, look at the seeds. A lot of times we don't even see them. We don't see them. Those seeds inside the tomato, next time you slice a tomato, look at the seeds. Yes. Diamond, are you there? Did I lose you?
Yeah, you're cutting in and out, so I was trying to get you caught up here. So let's talk about, we have about 15 minutes here. People are probably salivating. It's springtime. I know how I feel in the spring. I want to plant stuff. You live in the south, and we live in the middle latitude. We're right on the cusp, right at 38 north. You're probably more around 30 north?
I'm actually at 36.
Oh, so you're pretty north, near us. The difference is that you're on one side of the divide and we're on the other. It's really extreme here. It seldom gets above, it never gets above 60 degrees overnight, even in the warmest night. So that's why growing warm, sensitive plants like watermelons and long-term gourds and other things are impossible here unless you have a greenhouse, which we're putting in a huge football field-sized one, so we can do that. So all those options are off the table here. But what we do have available here is a list of brassicas that can almost grow perennially because they can live at temperatures down to 16 degrees and still stay green. And I think that moving into the future that we're moving into, these types of plants are going to be the key to surviving and thriving. Because let's say it's mid-June and all your sensitive crops are up and it stays 30 degrees for 2 days after some freak global warming-driven snowstorm that came down from the Arctic. This is going to kill every tomato in all of North America, and there will be no tomatoes. So only people that have greenhouses will be harvesting any food. But if all of the fields were planted in brassicas, if they all had spinach and New Zealand spinach and purple orac and every variety of kale and chard, our supermarkets would be full. Unfortunately, that's not what we're growing. But these are the key to being able to weather freak snowstorms in June and July, because brassicas suck up snow. They get sweeter when they get covered in snow. So there are certain crops that are absolutely going to change in dimension and flavor and really fill the palate of the hungry masses. How do you feel about those statements?
I kind of lost you there at the end, but I agree. I had some, I think it's called jack kale growing this year, and it came through all but that -8 degrees. That's what got it. But it was doing fine throughout the whole winter. Now, I got to tell you, I don't even like kale, but I'm growing a whole bunch of kale because, like I said, you don't have to like it, but when you're hungry, you'll eat it. And it is very, very good in the winter. It is good in the winter. I'll give you that. You know, I think about the foods that people do eat around the world. You think in France, snails. You know, escargot, a delightful delicacy. There is no time when I have been in my garden that I have looked at a snail and said, doesn't that look good? So why do people in France eat snails? I think I can tell you the reason. It's because at some time, and we know when that time was, that there were famines in France. And desperate people said, this looks like food today. I think we're going to find a way to cook this so that we can tolerate it. So I never want to end up eating snails, although I have tried them. You know, you put enough garlic and butter on something and it's, but I'm sure that's part of the reason people will eat grape leaves too and wrap food in grape leaves, because if you don't have something, you will eat what you do have. It's better to have kale than to be looking for snails underneath your plants. And even if you don't think you like turnips now, if you get really hungry, you'll find a way to make them taste good. And they're good food. They're really good food. I never ate what are they called? Kohlrabi until several years ago, because at the time you couldn't get them in the supermarket and they look weird and I don't know how to cook them. But now I grow them, and they truly are one of the most delicious foods in that class you can find. You just got to figure out how to produce it in such a way that you can eat it. And once again, the horror here is that all of this takes time. It takes time. It takes effort. And I don't know how much time we have anymore. And I'm not saying this to fearmonger. I just really don't know. I know my garden's going to be bigger this year, and I'm going to preserve food at a furious pace because I don't know what's going to happen next year, and I don't want my relatives and my family to go hungry. And I got to tell you, all my relatives are doing the same thing. And these are farm people. So something's going on. There's an awareness and a knowledge and a new willingness to produce our own food in ways we haven't in the past. What do you think about that? Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I think that people are more willing, and but they need answers. They're scared. This is all brand new, and Prepper Nurse One, who I've really become a fan of on YouTube, he has a mantra. It's called the STDs, and it's not sexually transmitted diseases. It says, I don't remember what it stands for, but it basically means a lot of people get overwhelmed because the list is huge. You start somewhere, you do it one day at a time, and whatever you've accomplished that day is a success because you're moving forward. So even if it's just going to the store, staring at all the seeds, and deciding to spend your extra $1 on that pack, that's a step forward. Tomorrow you can figure out where the soil is. And the next day you can figure out how to plant it. But you have to be moving forward. It's steps forward every day is going to get you to the end goal. And like you said, we don't know when this event or when the breakdown is going to happen. We know the miniature catastrophes are popping up on regular intervals, like the third nor'easter, which is going to be followed by the fourth nor'easter. A lot of those people probably wish they had a generator or some water stored or some extra food, chocolate, or any of those important things they thought they needed. It's only going to be longer intervals of time and longer periods of hardships if you're not properly prepared. Changing the mindset and experiencing new and interesting foods like kohlrabi are the keys to entertaining the palate of the future. I suggest everyone to buy a daikon radish, chop it up, and try roasting it if you don't like radishes. Because when you roast a radish, it tastes different. It almost tastes like meat. It's amazing what you can learn as these events unfold, and as you prepare. You're going to become a better, more informed person, a better, more informed citizen, and healthier if you start to make choices that are the choices that we have to make in the future. Now, we only have about 5 or 8 minutes left here, so before we finish up, I just want everyone that's just listening for the first time tonight to know where to get your book. And the book we've been discussing is Cold Times, Preparing for the Mini Ice Age, which is just one of the many books in Anita's warehouse, which you can find under her current pen name, Anita Bailey Phd. And if you go to Amazon, Anita Evangelista will come up underneath where her other titles are, which are also preparedness books, and there's a really cool book on the female fencer, which is just blows my mind, and also books on hypnosis. So you have such a breadth of knowledge on so many interesting topics. I just enjoy these conversations so much. We're going to continue for 2 more weeks, hopefully, with you. Let's just leave the next 5 minutes on some thoughts on surviving and thriving, because really this is not something to be fearful of. This is a learning opportunity, and I really think that it's going to be helpful for the way our societies develop.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to very briefly touch food here. We talked about it earlier, but a lot of people don't cook from scratch, don't know how to cook from scratch. Take 1 day a week and cook from scratch. And that's also part of that one thing at a time, learning, improving. The more you learn, the skills you learn are your future. And if you can take that bag of dried beans and turn it into a delicious meal that everybody in your family says, oh, can we have this again? Then you survive in the future. If you can't cook, you won't be able to eat. You have to be able to cook. So it's, in a way, it's a small thing, but it's a critically important thing. So yeah, I'd leave it with that for tonight. If, as a final thought, get in the kitchen and start trying out these things.
That's an excellent point, and I'm going to add to that as far as the preparedness issue is concerned. Guys, if you're out there listening and you want to know something practical you can invest in, go get a pressure cooker, not one that's digital or automatic from Walmart. I'm saying go to your local thrift store and go to all the Salvation Army and garage sales coming up in the spring, because there'll be many of them, and get an old pressure cooker that you can put on a wood-burning stove, on a cooktop, or a grill. This is going to save fuel, energy, and time for your dried goods. Learn how to cook rice and beans in it. Learn how to cook meat in it. You're going to find that it cooks things 10 times faster, infuses them with flavor, and you need a learning curve. This is an old technique that was invented. The first pressure cooker was invented during the Dalton Minimum, and it was a way to extract nutrition from the bones that everyone had thrown away. Because after they threw away all the bones and there was no more animals or bones, they went back to the piles to get the bones, because they're like, this is all we have left. The pressure cooker was invented to extract the nutrition out of the bones into the broth, which Ebenezer Scrooge was eating in Scrooge, the bone broth. So this is all tied to historical information that you can go research. We're not making this up. It's not fear-mongering. We're using science and history to warn you of the coming cold, which is predicted on every front. It's going to be historic, unprecedented, and overwhelming in the next few decades. You may not have more than a few years to prepare, because what we're waiting on is a catastrophic volcanic eruption in the VEI-7 range that we're well overdue for, to drop the global temperature quickly and cause global unrest. First of all, because it's going to be dark for quite some time, and the crop failures will follow, and we just don't know how it's going to unfold. So the time is now to start preparing yourself to survive and thrive when the plug gets pulled, so to speak, because it is coming. Technology is not going to save us, and it is also inedible. Do you have any final words?
Yes, I do. From writer who's online, he's calling avoid the rush.
Repeat that.
John Michael Greer says, collapse now and avoid the rush.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a really good point. And if you're stuck in a major city, start preparing a bug-out scenario. You do not want to stay there. If an event happens where the water and the electricity is going to be cut off for long term, we're not talking about nor'easter number 4. We're talking about a tsunami is going to hit. There was just a major earthquake and all transportation has been cut. The grid goes down because of a solar storm. You need to have a plan and a preparedness pack to pack up and go somewhere where you know there are people preparing for the coming events, where they're gardening and growing, and they have already prepared to survive and thrive in the future. This is probably the only way you'll be able to get out and to avoid the global unrest that will potentially be a nightmare if you stay for too long. We just have a minute. Do you want to tell anyone about where you can get your book or any other shout-outs you might want to say?
I lost you there.
Are there any other thoughts you might want to say in the last minute?
I think we're going to address some of those issues in the next show.
Excellent. Anita, let's try to work on our connection for another week, and we'll see how well it goes. For all of those of you listening, please go out and check out our YouTube channel at Oppenheimer Ranch Project on YouTube. We are on Facebook under many different titles, including the Oppenheimer Ranch Project. We have Solar Shutdown and Plasma Geology. If you want to check out our website where you can learn about the whole history on why we came out here and why we're doing this radio show and our YouTube channel, you can go to our website at 3canyons.org. And you can also find us at oppenheimerranch.org. Anita, I want to thank you again for being our guest. We'll see you next week. Guys, thanks for listening, and that's a boom.
Arts teacher at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, for being with us today. We mourn the loss of that community and that school and look forward to your testimony and your perspective on this issue. The committee also invited Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel